Robinson Crusoe by Daniel DeFoe. Read aloud by Samantha Dunn. I was born in the year 1632 in the city of York, of a good family, though not of that country, my father being a foreigner of Bremen, who settled at first at Hull. He got a good estate by merchandise, and leaving off his trade, lived afterward at York, from whence he had married my mother, whose relations were named Robinson, a very good family in that country, and from whom I was called Robinson. Being the third son of the family and not bred to any trade, my head began to be filled very early with rambling thoughts. My father had given me a competent share of learning and designed me for the law, but I would be satisfied with nothing but going to sea, and my inclination to this led me so strongly against the will of my father and entreaties of my mother, that there seemed to be something fatal in that propension of nature, tending directly to the life of misery which was to befall me. My father, a wise and grave man, gave me serious and excellent counsel against what he foresaw was my design. He called me one morning into his chamber, where he was confined by the gout, and expostulated very warmly with me upon this subject, asking me what reasons, more than a mere wandering inclination, I had for leaving my father's house and my native country. Though he said he would not cease to pray for me, yet he would venture to say to me that if I did take this foolish step, God would not bless me, and I should have leisure hereafter to reflect upon having neglected his counsel, when there might be none to assist in my recovery. I was sincerely affected with this discourse, and I resolved not to think of going abroad any more, but to settle at home according to my father's desire. But alas, a few days wore it all off, and a few weeks after I resolved to run quite away from him. However, I took my mother at a time when I thought her a little more pleasant than ordinary, and told her that my thoughts were entirely bent upon seeing the world, and that my father had better give me his consent than force me to go without it, and if she would speak to my father to let me go one voyage abroad, if I came home again and did not like it, I would go no more. But this my mother refused to do, saying she knew it would be to no purpose to speak to my father upon any such subject. It was not until almost a year after this, being one day at Hull, that, meeting one of my companions about to go to sea to London in his father's ship, and prompting me to go with him, I consulted neither father nor mother any more, nor so much as sent them word of it, but leaving them to hear of it as they might, without asking God's blessing or my father's, on the 1st of September, 1651, I went on board a ship bound for London. Never any young adventurer's misfortunes, I believe, began sooner or continued longer than mine. The ship was no sooner got out of the Humber than the wind began to blow and the sea to rise in a most frightful manner, and, as I had never been at sea before, I was most inexpressibly sick in body and terrified in mind. I began now seriously to reflect upon what I had done, and how justly I was overtaken by the judgment of heaven for my wicked leaving my father's house and abandoning my duty. All this while the storm increased and the sea went very high, though nothing like what I had seen many times since. No, nor what I saw a few days after. I expected every wave would have swallowed us up, and that every time the ship fell down, as I thought it did, in the trough or hollow of the sea, we should never rise more. In this agony of mind, I made many vows and resolutions that if it would please God to spare my life in this one voyage, if ever I got my foot upon dry land again, I would go directly home to my father and never set it into a ship again while I lived. These wise and sober thoughts continued all the while the storm lasted, and indeed some time after. But the next day the wind was abated, and the sea calmer, and I began to be a little inured to it. However, I was very grave for all that day, being also a little seasick still. But towards night the weather cleared up, the wind was quite over, and a charming fine evening followed. The sun went down perfectly clear and rose so the next morning, having little or no wind and a smooth sea, the sun shining upon it, the sight was, as I thought, the most delightful that I ever saw. I had slept well in the night, and was now no more seasick, but very cheerful, looking with wonder upon the sea that was so rough and terrible the day before, and could be so calm and so pleasant in so little a time after. The 6th day of our being at sea, we came into Yarmouth Roads. The wind having been contrary and the weather calm, we had made but little way since the storm. Here we were obliged to come to an anchor, and here we lay, the wind continuing contrary for 7 or 8 days, during which time a great many ships from Newcastle came into the same roads as the common harbour, where the ships might wait for a wind for the river. But the 8th day in the morning the wind increased, and we had all hands at work to strike our topmasts and make everything snug and close, that the ship might ride as easy as possible. By noon the sea went very high indeed, and our ship rode forecastle in, shipped several seas, and we thought once or twice our anchor had come home. By this time it blew a terrible storm indeed, and now I began to see terror and amazement in the faces even of the seamen themselves. The master, though vigilant in the business of preserving the ship, yet as he went in and out of his cabin by me, I could hear him softly to himself say several times, "Lord, be merciful to us. We shall be all lost. We shall be all undone." Toward evening, the mate and boatswain begged the master of our ship to let them cut away the foremast, which he was very unwilling to do, but the boatswain protesting to him that if he did not the ship would founder, he consented, and when they had cut away the foremast, the mainmast stood so loose and shook the ship so much, they were obliged to cut that away also, and make a clear deck. And one must judge what a condition I must be in all this, who was but a young sailor, and who had been in such a fright before at but a little. But the worst was not come yet. The storm continued with such fury that the seamen themselves acknowledged they had never seen a worse. We had a good ship, but she was deep laden and wallowed in the sea, so that the seamen every now and then cried out that she would founder. It was my advantage in one respect that I did not know what they meant by founder, till I inquired. However, the storm was so violent that I saw, what is not often seen, the master, the boatswain, and some others more sensible than the rest, at their prayers, and expecting every moment when the ship would go to the bottom. In the middle of the night, and under all the rest of our distresses, one of the men, that had been down to see, cried out that we had sprung a leak. Another said there was 4 feet of water in the hold, and then all hands were called to the pump. At that word my heart, as I thought, died within me, and I fell backwards upon the side of my bed, where I sat, into the cabin. However, the men roused me and told me that that I was able to do nothing before, was as well able to pump as another, at which I stirred up and went to the pump and worked very heartily. But the water increasing in the hold, it was apparent that the ship would founder, and though the storm began to abate a little, yet as it was not possible she could swim till we might run into any port. So the master continued firing guns for help, and a little ship, who had rid it out just ahead of us, ventured a boat out to help us. It was with the utmost hazard the boat came near us, but it was impossible for us to get on board, or for the boat to lie near the ship's side, till at last the men, rowing very heartily and venturing their lives to save ours, our men cast them a rope over the stern with a buoy attached to it, and then veered it out at great length, which they, after much labor and hazard, took hold of, and we hauled them close under our stern, and got all into their boat, and partly rowing and partly driving, our boat went away to the northward sloping towards the shore almost as far as Winterton Ness. We were not much more than a quarter of an hour out of our ship till we saw her sink. And then I understood for the first time what was meant by a ship foundering in the sea. We made but slow way, nor were we able to reach the shore till, being past the lighthouse at Winterton, the shore falls off to the westward, towards Cromer, and so the land broke off a little the violence of the wind. Here we got in, and though not without much difficulty, got all safe on shore, and walked afterwards on foot to Yarmouth, where, as unfortunate men, we were used with great humanity, and had money given us sufficient to carry us either to London or back to Hull, as we thought fit. Had I now had the sense to have gone back to Hull and have gone home, I had been happy, and my father, an emblem of our blessed Saviour's parable, had even killed the fatted calf for me, for hearing the ship I went away in was cast away in Yarmouth roads. It was a great while before he had any assurances that I was not drowned. But my ill fate pushed me on, now with an obstinacy that nothing could resist. Having some money in my pocket, I travelled to London by land, and there was well on the road, had many struggles with myself what course of life I should take, and whether I should go home or go to sea. In this state of life, however, I remained some time uncertain what measures to take and what course of life to lead. An irresistible reluctance continued to going home, and as I stayed a while, the remembrances of the distress I had been in wore off, and as that abated, the little motion I had in my desires to return wore off with it, till at last I quite laid aside the thoughts of it and looked out for a voyage. It was my lot, first of all, to fall into pretty good company in London, which does not always happen to such loose and misguided young fellows as I then was, the devil generally not omitting to lay some snare for them very early. But it was not so with me. I first got acquainted with the master of a ship who had been on the coast of Guinea, and who, having had very good successes there, was resolved to go again. This captain, taking a fancy to my conversation, which was not at all disagreeable at the time, hearing me say I had a mind to see the world, told me that if I would go the voyage with him, I should be at no expense. I should be his messmate and his companion, and if I could carry anything with me, I should have all the advantage of it that the trade would admit, and perhaps I might meet with some encouragement. I embraced the offer, and this was the only voyage which I may say was successful in all of my adventures, and which I owe to the integrity and honesty of my friend the captain, under whom also I got a competent knowledge of the mathematics and the rules of navigation, learned how to keep an account of the ship's course, take an observation, and, in short, to understand some things that were needful to be understood by a sailor. For, as he took delight to instruct me, I took delight to learn, and, in a word, this voyage made me both a sailor and a merchant, for I brought home 5 pounds 9 ounces of gold dust for my adventure, which yielded me in London at my return almost 300 pounds, and this filled me with those aspiring thoughts which have since so completed my ruin. I was now set up for a Guinea trader, and my friend, to my great misfortune, dying soon after his arrival, I resolved to go to the same voyage again, and I embarked in the same vessel with who was his mate in the former voyage, and had now got the command of the ship. This was not the unhappiest voyage that ever man made, for though I did not carry quite 100 pounds of my new gained wealth, so that I had 200 pounds left, which I had lodged with my friend's widow, who was very just to me. Yet I fell into terrible misfortunes on this voyage. And the first was this, viz., our ship, making her course towards the Canary Islands, or rather between those islands and the African shore, was surprised in the grey of the morning by a Moorish rover of Sallee, who gave chase to us with all the sail she could make. We crowded also as much canvas as our yards would spread, or our masts carry, to have gone clear, but finding the pirate gained upon us, and would certainly come up with us in a few hours, we prepared to fight, our ship having 12 guns and the rogue 18. About 3 in the afternoon, he came up with us and bringing to, by mistake, just athwart our quarter, instead of athwart our stern, as he intended. We brought 8 of our guns to bear on his side and poured in a broadside upon him, which made him sheer off again, and returning our fire, and pouring in also his small shot from near 200 men, which he had on board. However, we had not a man touched, all our men keeping close. He prepared to attack us again, and we to defend ourselves, but laying us on board the next time upon our other quarter, he entered 60 men upon our decks, who immediately fell to cutting and hacking the sails and rigging. We plied them with small shot, half-pikes, powder chests, and such like, and cleared our deck of them twice. However, to cut short this melancholy part of our story, our ship being disabled and 3 of our men killed and 8 wounded, we were obliged to yield, and were carried all prisoners into Scilly, a port belonging to the Moors. The usage I had there was not so dreadful as at first I apprehended, nor was I carried up the country to the emperor's court, as the rest of our men were, but was kept by the captain of the rover as his proper prize, and made his slave, being young and nimble, and fit for his business. As my new patron, or master, had taken me home to his house, so I was in hopes that he would take me with him when he went to sea again, believing that it would some time or other be his fate to be taken by a Spanish or Portuguese man of war, and that then I should be set at liberty. But this hope of mine was soon taken away, for when he went to sea, he left me on shore to look after his little garden, and do the common drudgery of slaves about his house. And when he came home again from his cruise, he ordered me to lie the cabin to look after the ship. Here I meditated nothing but my escape, and what method I would take to effect it, but found no way that had the least probability in it. After about 2 years, an odd circumstance presented itself, which put the old thought of making some attempt for my liberty again in my head. It happened one time that, going a-fishing with him in a calm morning, a fog rose so thick that though we were not half a league from the shore, we lost sight of it, and rowing we knew not whither or which way, we labored all day and all the next night. And when the morning came, we found that we had pulled out to sea instead of pulling in for shore, and that we were at least 2 leagues from the land. However, we got well in again, though with a great deal of labor and some danger, for the wind began to blow pretty fresh in the morning. But our patron, warned by this disaster, resolved to take more care of himself for the future, and having lying by him the long boat of our English ship, which he had taken, he resolved he would not go a-fishing any more without a compass and some provisions. So he ordered the carpenter of his ship, who also was an English slave, to build a little stateroom or cabin in the middle of the long boat, like that of a barge, with a place to stand behind it to steer and haul home the main sheet, and room before for a hand or 2 to stand and work the sails. We went frequently out with this boat a-fishing, and as I was most dexterous to catch fish for him, he never went without me. It happened that he had appointed to go out in his boat, either for pleasure or for fish, with 2 or 3 Moors of some distinction in that place, and for whom he had provided extraordinarily, and had therefore sent on board the boat overnight a larger store of provisions than usual, and had ordered me to get ready 3 muskets with powder and shot, which were on board his ship, for that they designed some sport of fowling as well as fishing. I got all things ready as he had directed, when by and by my patron came on board alone, and told me his guests had put off going, from some business that fell out, and ordered me, with the Moor and boy as usual, to go out with the boat and catch them some fish, and that his friends were to sup at his house. He commanded me, too, that as soon as I had got some fish, I should bring it home to his house, all which I prepared to do. This moment my former notions of deliverance darted into my thoughts, for now I found I was likely to have a little ship at my command, and my master being gone, I prepared to furnish myself not for fishing business, but for a voyage, though I knew not, neither did I so much as consider, whither I would steer, for anywhere to get out of that place was my desire. My first contrivance was to make a pretence to speak to this Moor, to get something for our subsistence on board, for I told him we must not presume to eat of our patron's bread. He said that was true, so he brought a large basket of rusk, or biscuit of their kind, and 3 jars with fresh water into the boat. I conveyed also a great lump of beeswax into the boat, which weighed about 1/2 hundredweight, with a parcel of twine or thread, a hatchet, a saw, and a hammer, all of which were of great use to us afterwards, especially the wax to make candles. Another trick I tried upon him, which he innocently came into also. His name was Ismail, which they call Mooley, or Moley. So I called to him, Moley, said I, our patron's guns are all on board the boat. Can you not get a little powder and shot? It may be that we kill some alchemies, a fowl like our curlews, for ourselves, for I know he keeps the gunner's stores in the ship. Well, yes, says he, I'll bring some. Accordingly, he brought a great leather pouch, which held about 1.5 pounds of powder, or rather more, and another was shot, that had 5 or 6 pounds, with some bullets, and put all into the boat. At the same time, I had found some powder of my master's in the great cabin, with which I filled one of the large bottles in the case, which was almost empty, pouring what was in it into another, and thus furnished with everything needful, we sailed out of the port to fish. The castle, which is at the entrance of the port, knew who we were, and took no notice of us, and we were not above a mile out of the port before we hauled in our sail, and sat us down to fish. After we had fished some time and caught nothing, I said to the Moor, This will not do. Our master will not be thus served. We must stand farther off. He, thinking no harm, set the sails, and, as I had the helm, I ran the boat out near a league further, and then brought her to as if I would fish. When, giving the boy the helm, I stepped forward to where the Moor was, and making as if I stooped for something behind him, I took him by surprise with my arm under his waist and tossed him clear overboard into the sea. He rose immediately, for he swam like a cork, and called to me, begged to be taken in, telling me he would go all over the world with me. He swam so strong after the boat that he would have reached me very quickly, there being but little wind, upon which I stepped into the cabin, and fetching one of the fowling pieces, I presented it at him, and told him I had done him no hurt, and if he would be quiet, I would do him none. But, said I, you swim well enough to reach the shore, and the sea is calm. Make the best of your way to shore, and I will do you no harm. But if you come near the boat, I'll shoot you through the head, for I am resolved to have my liberty. So he turned himself about and swam for the shore, and I made no doubt but he reached it with ease, for he was an excellent swimmer. When he was gone, I turned to the boy, whom they called Suri, and said to him, Suri, if you will be faithful to me, I'll make you a great man. But if you will not stroke your face to be true to me, well, that is, swear by Mahomet and his father's beard, I must throw you into the sea too. The boy smiled in my face and spoke so innocently that I could not mistrust him, and swore to be faithful to me and go all over the world with me. While I was in the view of the Moor that was swimming, I stood out directly to sea, that they might think me gone towards the strait's mouth. But as soon as it grew dusk in the evening, I changed my course and steered directly south and by east, bending my course a little towards the east, that I might keep in with the shore. And having a fair fresh gale of wind and a smooth quiet sea, I made such sail that I believe by the next day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when I first made the land, I could not be less than 150 miles south of Sallee. Yet such was the fright I had taken at the Moors, and the dreadful apprehensions I had of falling into their hands, that I would not stop, or go on shore, or come to an anchor, the wind continuing fair till I had sailed in that manner 5 days. Then, the wind shifting to the southward, I concluded also that if any of our vessels were in chase of me, they also would now give over. So I ventured to make to the coast, and came to an anchor in the mouth of a little river. I knew not what nor where, neither what latitude, what country, what nation, or what river. I neither sought nor desired to see any people. The principal thing I wanted was fresh water. We came into this creek in the evening, resolving to swim on shore as soon as it was dark, and discover the country. But as soon as it was quite dark, we heard such dreadful noises of the barking, roaring, and howling of wild creatures, of which we knew not what kinds, that the poor boy was ready to die with fear, and begged of me not to go to shore till day. After all, Surrey's advice was good, and I took it. We dropped our little anchor and lay still all night. I say still, for we slept none. Surrey was dreadfully frightened, and indeed so was I too. But we were both more frightened when we heard one mighty creature come swimming towards our boat. However, I immediately stepped to the cabin door, and taking up my gun, fired at him. Upon which he immediately turned around and swam towards the shore again. But it is impossible to describe the horrid noises and hideous cries and howlings that were raised, as well upon the edge of the shore as higher within the country, upon the noise or report of a gun, a thing I have some reason to believe these creatures had never heard before. This convinced me that there was no going on shore for us in the night upon that coast, and how to venture on shore in the day was another question too. For to have fallen into the hands of any of the savages, that been as bad as to have fallen into the paws of lions and tigers. At least we were equally apprehensive of the danger of it. Be that as it would, we were obliged to go on shore somewhere or other for water, for we had not a pint left in the boat. When or where to get it was the point. Surrey said, if I would let him go on shore with one of the jars, he would find it if there was any water and bring some to me. I asked him why would he go? Why I should not go, and he stay in the boat. The boy answered with so much affection that made me love him ever after. Says he, if wild mans come, they eat me, you go away. Well, Surrey, said I, we will both go, and if the wild mans come, we will kill them. They shall eat neither of us. So I gave Surrey a piece of rusk bread to eat, and we hauled the boat in as near the shore as we thought was proper, and waited on shore carrying nothing but our arms and 2 jars for water. I did not care to go out of sight of the boat, fearing the coming of canoes with savages down the river, but the boy, seeing a low place about a mile up the country, rambled to it, and by I saw him come running towards me. I thought he was pursued by some savage or frightened with some wild beast, and I ran forward towards him to help him. But when I came nearer to him, I saw something hanging over his shoulders, which was a creature that he had shot, like a hare, but different in color, and longer legs. However, we were very glad of it, and it was very good meat. But the great joy poor Surrey came with was to tell me he had found good water, and seen no wild mans. So we filled our jars, and feasted on the hare we had killed, and prepared to go on our way, having seen no footsteps of any human creature in that part of the country. After this stop, we made on to the southward continually for 10 or 12 days, living very sparingly on our provisions, which began to abate very much, and going no oftener into the shore than we were obliged to for fresh water. My design in this was to make the river Gambia or Senegal, well, that is to say, anywhere about the Cape de Verde, where I was in hopes to meet with some European ship, and if I did not, I knew not what course I would take, but to seek for the islands, or perish there among the negroes. I knew that all the ships from Europe which sailed either to the coast of Guinea or to Brazil, or to the East Indies, made this cape, or those islands, and, in a word, I put the whole of my fortune upon this single point, either that I must meet with some ship, or must perish. That's the end of part 1. Join us. for part 2. Thank you.